Man, I'm psyched for this. It's been way too long since I shot the shit with my man John Middlekauff. Three and Out is the podcast. Make sure you download, you listen, you watch. Also part of the Volume, Colin Cowherd's company there, which is excellent. So many podcasts, so many analysts, players breaking it all down. But I don't know. I'm trying to think back, John, when we first kind of crossed paths. I think I was out there in Santa Clara maybe for a Niners story in the Bleacher Report days. But
Oh yeah.
something about you, there's a magnetic pull. Like this dude knows his stuff when it comes to all things football. I mean, you were a scout, so you actually did it.
Did you ever go to Raiders training camp in Napa?
Yes, maybe it was
I might
Raiders.
I might have run into you there. I was going, probably in the probably 2014 through 15, 16, 17, going to both, but definitely spent a lot of time in that Napa training camp with Jack Del Rio and Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper and Derek Carr. Now, ironically, now two of them are retired. You know, Amari's like, yeah, no, don't really feel like playing. Derek, obviously shoulder and by all accounts feels kind of commendable. He just didn't want to take the money where I think most guys would have been like, hey, shit, this is football. You would screw me, take $30 million, cut your shoulder cut up on, but it probably helps when you've made $225 million.
That 2016 Raiders team is like long forgotten, but they probably had a legitimate chance of winning it all. I mean, the way that they would win games late, like the defense wasn't great, but Khalil Mack is in his prime. Derek Carr's got something, some magic pixie dust working in that locker room. They just believe they'd find a way to win. He's an MVP front runner. Then he breaks his leg. They have to roll with Connor Cook. They lose, and that's about as close as Derek Carr ever got.
It shows you, it's a different situation because it's whatever week 2 when Burrow gets injured and essentially ends the season, right? If he's out 3 months, is that deflating nature of I remember now. I don't know if they would have won it all, but he was playing. He's never played better football, and Khalil, I mean, at the time was every bit as dominant as Aaron Donald and was a one man wrecking crew. But when that quarterback gets injured, and you've written a lot about that position, and I saw Chris Sims this kind of clip from his podcast about like how quarterbacks shouldn't get paid. Like when his dad was playing, like Lawrence Taylor made more. And I understand, like if you're a tight end, like an elite tight end in his prime, like before Kittle got hurt, he's kind of getting screwed. Like Brandon Ayuk shouldn't be making way more money than him. Like Kittle is universally a better player. Every team would agree, and every team would pick him over the overwhelming majority of wide receivers if they're healthy, right? But it's like quarterback, their value is obviously on the field, which when you lose a guy, whether it's a mid-tier guy like a Dak or Tua, or whether it's a Burrow, it just derails everything. I mean,
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's it's what Kyle Shanahan. We're doing this right after week 2, just winning a game on the road with Mac Jones. You could argue Mac Jones like earned his salary in one game. Like you just get a win with a backup quarterback, especially a road game. I don't care who the opponent is. That's a pretty big accomplishment.
Because it's so deflating. I mean, my God, I remember when Aaron Rodgers went down against Chicago, Shea McClellan, primetime game. Seneca Wallace comes in, and then Seneca Wallace got hurt the next game against Philly, and then Scott Tolzien comes in. It's just, you've got a locker room full of guys who think that they are going to get to the Super Bowl, win it with an MVP quarterback. You lose that energy force, and it's like the energy just drains out of a locker room when you're that reliant. I mean, it's crazy that they made the playoffs that year. I think that would have been
Well, was that when he broke his
fourth and eight,
clavicle and came
Randall
back
Cobb.
toward the end of the season, and then they got hot?
Yeah, yeah. There was a few different injuries. He had the calf a couple years after that. But anyways, you're so right. Like it can. I imagine that you saw it out of Jake Browning. Like he played well a couple years ago, but he's not Joe Burrow.
No.
It's got to be deflating.
See, like him in his own story, and I watched. I mean, it makes me sad the Pac-12, but like in the Pac-12's heyday, I don't know if it was heyday, but like it was a good moment. Chris Peterson takes over Washington. I'm from Northern California. He's from Folsom. It's a big time powerhouse now in high school football in Sacramento. They're kind of like the De La Salle. They've kind of taken over a little bit for that, even though De La Salle's still pretty good. I never in a million years, if you would have said, hey, Jake Browning, what's his NFL career look like? I'm like, well, he's such a high character guy. He's been a 4 year starter at a good program. He'll probably get an invite to a camp. But like
Yeah.
once he gets cut, like I don't even think he's a practice squad guy. let alone now you look back, he's dramatically better. Like he's an incredible story that he's
Oh,
even like a pretty
unbelievable.
functional player. I mean, he's going to have like a 12-year career.
Yeah. I forgot this too. Yeah, because we did a story on Jake Browning a couple years ago at Go Long, and he threw for more yards and more touchdowns than any high school quarterback in California history. 16,775 yards, 229 touchdowns, completed more passes than anybody ever, 1,191. But yeah, he's not that big, doesn't have that strong of an arm, not that athletic, but he's highly productive. You know he's going to be confident stepping into this, man. He
Did
plays.
you write in that story that he like did something in the offseason to train, like get his arm a little more powerful or something happened? Because he definitely is a different. He's a stronger quarter. I thought his arm, of like a 1 to 10 scale, if like Josh Allen's a 10, like a Purdy Dak is like a 5 or 6. I thought he was like a 1, coming out of college. And,
Yeah.
and now, it's not a 10, but it's definitely closer to like a 3 or 4 than it was when he was coming. He was Chris Peterson's Kellen Moore, what he had at Boise State, then at even a higher level because they could recruit a little bit better. And he's really now obviously it's his relationship in the building with Burrow is strong, but he's a legitimate backup. I mean, you could argue I bet if we did a deep dive, probably one
Yeah.
of the better backups in the league.
It's so funny, John. Like you write these stories and you don't even remember what in the hell you wrote. Like I that did not ring any bells in my head, but I was just reading the feature from a couple years ago, and yeah, that's exactly what he did. Like he worked with
Yeah, I
Jordan
remember.
Palmer and got his arm stronger. Man, good
I
memory.
can't remember 3 days ago, but I can remember something about a player written in a story about
Yeah,
improving his
yeah.
strength.
I appreciate that. Well, it's awesome to have you. I mean, everybody out there should know that they hear you talking about football, but man, you did it. You were a scout with the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think you just remind me so much of my buddy Jim Monis, who used to be on this pod a bunch. And he was a scout with the Eagles, Saints, and Bills. And you just got a different perspective. It's not, you're never going to get just wrapped up into the mainstream talking points. Like we see it every week, right? Like there's the Monday reaction, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, those takes can kind of marinate in everybody's brains and become what everybody just assumes to be factual. But I think the fact that you were a scout, you've lived it in those front offices, you're always thinking outside the box. But can you just let people know about your past a little bit? I want to say 3+ years as a scout with the Eagles, right? Like 2010,
Yeah, well,
2012, maybe.
I actually started. I went to a smaller school, Cal Poly, that had, for those football junkies, Chris Gokong back in the day was drafted by the Eagles. Ramses Barden was drafted a couple years later by the Giants in the third round. We were, decent D1 AA program, but I just got to college and I was like, I was a high school football player, not any good, but I loved it, and you started missing it. Like I could only go to so many, frat parties. You just kind of there was a void in my life, and I realized I'm not. It's a big architecture school. I realized like I don't think I'm smart enough to just get by half-assing a job in the real world. Like I'm gonna hate my life. How do I work in sports? And I took actually a journalism class, and I actually had an article back. This is like '06, '07, '08. School newspapers. I would imagine it's changed a little bit with phones and social media and stuff. But the Mustang Daily was a big deal out on Cal Poly's campus, and I got like a weekly piece called Johnny in the Box, and I kind of like basically tried to copy what Bill Simmons was doing at the time. Mess around and just have columns. But it kind of got my juices flowing, and then I met a guy that worked on the coaching staff at Cal Poly, and I started helping them out. And this isn't exactly like Alabama or Texas, so it's like my first day, I'm like helping out at practice, I'm doing recruiting stuff, and it just kind of grew from there. And my cousin had played football at Fresno State, and you cover the Bills like Ryan Wendell, who was on the coaching staff there.
Oh
He
yeah.
played with Logan Mankins and a bunch of guys in the mid 2000s that played in the NFL, obviously. So I went to visit him one time, and
That's your
I
cousin?
entered. What?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's your cousin, Ryan
No,
Wendell?
no, no. He played with Ryan Well. That's
Oh,
my cousin's
gotcha.
not right. He
Okay.
he was the long snapper, but he,
Got
he
it.
was on
Okay.
teams with a ton of pros. I mean, guys drafted in the first round, like guys like Ryan Wendell that played for a long time in the league, and it was a program that it's much harder for these programs to exist now because all their good players get stolen. Fresno State has a soft spot for me, but it's like the player, even when I was a GA there, we had Ryan Matthews, who was a top 15 pick. There's no way he could have turned down the amount of money that the bigger schools would have offered him by like his sophomore year. But I got a job in recruiting. So I was like, well, I'm graduating in 2008, and I get the opportunity to kind of be a quote unquote GA, which a lot of coaches do. But this was kind of ahead of its time because Pat Hill, and he was a Belichick guy, and he kind of thought about things from an NFL perspective, and got my foot in the door, and it kind of just took off from there. For a couple years, I was doing recruiting. Derek Carr was part of a big class that we signed. Devontae Adams came right after I left, but that really helped introduce me to a bunch of NFL guys that and I was just like just so hungry and just willing to do whatever it took. So like when NFL guys would come through, they would just come right to me, and I'd give them the insight on our players. Now, granted, we it's not like we had any questionable characters, but like a lot of their job is like, as you know, to be a detective. I'm like, I kind of want to do that. It's not like I grew up like McVay or my dad was a farmer. Like I didn't know. I'd never been to an NFL game until I got hired with the Eagles and went to Lincoln to the like our first preseason game. So it was always like, how do I get into this? And then once I started working at Fresno State, you start meeting these people who now, like Adam Peters or Ryan Grigson or all these guys in the NFL that would come through that would go on to be GMs, Spytech, Jason Light, you name it. They were all coming through as like, number twos or threes in their organization, or just, West Coast scouts. And then I got hired in Philly and moved back there at like 25, 26 years old, and worked there for a couple of years. And Daniel Jeremiah, who was our West Coast scout, just took a job. He's like, I'm tired of this crap. And he's like, I'm going to go work in TV. And luckily, being on the East Coast, like, hey, is there any way? And I was like begging for the job. Can I get the West Coast gig? So, I think I benefited that most guys didn't want to move to like back to California. I was like, I'll move back West Coast. And then I did that for a year, and that was the year that Andy got fired and Chip came in, and then they kind of rearranged some stuff. So I kind of just got back into the media, and it kind of took off from there. But it was one of those things like you work with like a Howie Roseman, like he'd wanted to work in the NFL since he was like 5. Some of these guys, a lot of these guys either played college football, and it just was like their life. For me, it was one of those things that just, I don't want to say just kind of happened, but it just like organically grew and grew. And then it just, all of a sudden I realized like, I'm just sitting in an office in the Eagles facility, and like Michael Vick's our starting quarterback, and Andy Reid's our coach, and Sean McDermott's our defensive coordinator. I mean, I got very lucky. So like my perspective, you said that is based on like I think about things differently. I just worked in an environment where a ton of guys now, half the Chiefs organization, obviously the Eagles with Howie, and guys all around the league on that team. So it's like I'm a long time removed. Like I'm a talking head. Like that's what I do. I'm a podcaster, but I'm able to talk to these guys constantly and get their perspective, which is so dramatically different typically than like if you just flip on the TV on, Monday morning. I think that's been a huge, one advantage like Coward has is he knows so many GMs. So a lot of his perspective when he goes in on a guy, like I'm out on this guy, it's because like 3 or 4 GMs that are making the playoffs are like, I ain't touching that guy. So it helps than just kind of giving a take from left field that people in the league are like, what are you talking about?
Ain't that the truth? It pays. I mean, that's just good old fashioned reporting, right? Talk to
Yeah.
people in the know, and that can help
Well,
shape
look at
an
your article.
educated.
How much it aged even better a week later. It's one of those things like this isn't a lot of this stuff isn't like I'm not that which one thing that sucks is you grow up, you love sports, you love football. The more you get into it, I don't even want to say jaded. You just become a little numb to everything, right?
Mhm.
And like that, the way these guys talk, it's like whenever someone gets mad at me, or I'm sure this happens to you too. It's like, well, everything I say, my name is on it. Like there's no anonymous quote from Middlekauff. Like it's all out there.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
guys say the same things, but you never put your name on anything, which I understand why. But don't act like I'm just like we're any different here. I'm just publicly saying it. You don't publicly say it, even though we're thinking the same thing. You're talking shit about half the league. So give me a break.
Right. And I've said this before when I do one of these big series or stories, it's like you stand by every single word because you have the background. Like you know what was left on the cutting room floor. And also there's going to be specific examples supplied. I mean, that was the case with Caleb Williams, Ryan Poles. I mean, that stuff can kind of bring it to life too, where it's not just a take in the oven. But I want to ask you about your West Coast scouting days. When you're an area scout, Monis would get into this a lot too. Like, which report are you most proud of that maybe you wrote on a guy? And is there one that you're like, oh man, I missed on that guy?
I only did it for a year, truly on the road.
Okay,
When you're in house, you're just kind of covering a little. Like I got sent to a couple schools. I did a lot of pro stuff, which is much more just black and white on the tape. There's not emotion or character stuff. It's just about the player because the character stuff was already covered, and then a GM or coach will deal with that if we're going to acquire or trade for a player. The year that I was doing it was like Star was coming out of Utah, Dion Jordan was coming out of Oregon, Robert Woods, Zach Ertz. Uh, it was actually a pretty decent class. But one thing people ask me all the time, like if you could do it over again, what would you do differently? And I think you got to be very careful about mixing, evaluating the player, the character. They can all become one. And that is true once you acquire the player. He is also the person. But like you also got to be careful about, I mean, look at Honey Badger. He was kicked out of school and everyone thought like, oh, major character red flag. He's been a team captain for every team he played for. And,
right,
and by like his
right.
second year in Arizona, Patrick Peterson was being like, yeah, he's the heartbeat of the team. So it's like, now listen, there are a lot of Honey Badgers that are viewed as like crazy red flags that go on to have a lot of issues, which his example, like he was like synthetic weed. It doesn't even sound that bad when you say it out loud now. But I think it's just very difficult to balance the character stuff, which obviously there are some stuff that is just, could be viewed as heinous or whatever. You're like, I wouldn't touch that. But a lot of stuff is like, God, if I was 21 or 22, is it really that bad? Or is it like coming from a position coach when you go in? You also got to be careful about this, right? If you walked into my house and me and my wife had just had like a big fight over something, maybe it'd be a lot different than if you came in and we were just had the best day of our lives. So it's no different when you walk into a room. If you walk into a program right now, if you went into like LSU, well, they're rolling, right? They're undefeated. They're like they can win the national championship. Like, spirits would be high. They're probably going to talk up some of their guys. But if I walked into Clemson right now, or Notre Dame's probably I would put them to the side because they're playing actually pretty good. They're just losing these crazy games. But if I walked into Clemson where it feels like they are in trouble, you might get a negative spin on something where it's like the guy actually maybe he's not even playing that bad, but the coach crushes him. So that's where it's a very difficult. You see this during the draft time of like everyone's got all these takes about uh with personalities and character. There's no right or wrong answer with this stuff. It's very, very difficult. And for the most part, these guys are taking educated guesses, right?
Yeah.
And most guys are not like true just off a board. It's like, yeah, there's a little something there, but maybe in 2 years, you get him in the right room with the right veteran guy, the right position coach. He becomes like man of the year by his seventh year. You just never know.
It's a great point on Tyrann Mathieu too, because I can remember being in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and it that was a huge story. That everything around him, and you look back, and it's almost you kind of chuckle that it was weed, but at the time it was. And you don't want to touch this guy with a 10-foot pole if you're an NFL team. I just remember like a herd of media descending upon him. Just he had to answer for some hardcore questions, but with him, I think it was a matter of okay, did he learn from his mistakes? Because we were sitting down, it might have been a Bleacher Report story when he was with the Texans, and when we were talking in his house, it was when Josh Gordon was just like suspended again for weed, and this look of disappointment just overtook the Honey Badger. He was just like, oh my god, like he's like Josh Gordon. He's just got to look in the mirror. I'm paraphrasing and just own it, and like and learn. If you can't learn from a mistake, if I screw up again, if I do this again, I'm effed. Like, and you still do it. That kind of
Yeah.
speaks to character. I mean, it brings to mind Anthony Richardson. I had to pull it up here. Yeah, so McGinn had this at our site last year. I think I might have mentioned this before. But back in college in April 2022, he was ticketed for driving 105 in a 60 mile per hour zone at 4:11 a.m. outside of Gainesville. 4:11 a.m. He pleaded no
Jeez.
contest and was ordered to complete a traffic safety course
I haven't been
right next.
up that late in like 15 years.
We get up that morning with Rocco now.
I know.
So he gets in trouble, had to pay a $349 fine. Okay, like that's pretty bad. That's pretty fast. But, strike one. What happens 2 months later? He's drunk at the Manning Passing Academy at Nicholls State University. The police reportedly become angry when he leans on a squad car. Manning staffers had to usher him into a van, but Richardson screamed an obscenity at officers as he departed the scene. No arrest was made. I mean, to do something like that 2 months later, more than like the crimes themselves, which are pretty bad, that just kind of speaks to the character of somebody to not learn, to not know I can't screw up again.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we think character, I think the average fan or the average person, especially when it comes to football, think like criminal activity or, guy. Sometimes it's just decision making. I mean, you're paying these
Right.
guys a lot of money. Quarterback is viewed dramatically different than basically every other position, right? So the decision making, most of the best quarterbacks, for the most part, are pretty great decision makers off the field. And some guys that have been in some issues or had some problems, like let's use Roethlisberger as an example, is like an all-time physical outlier. He's like 6'6", 250 pounds, cannon arm. If Ben had been 6'1", average player, they probably would have kicked him to the curb. So part of it, sometimes you get more the benefit of the doubt for being a better player. It's like I've never like I don't apologize for being numb in the NFL. Like this is what part of being a consumer, part of being a fan. You got to get used to. Guys with more talent get more opportunities, and sometimes it's going to feel dirty and icky or whatever. But go back to the history of the sport. Back when they didn't care about anything, even back in the 60s or 70s, nothing's ever changed. And now with more money on the line, I think the thing with Anthony Richardson, he just wasn't any good. So it's like, what the hell? You're just awful. You're just a bad player, you know? And like, at least, Caleb's a good example. You do see some of the physical traits. Like, he's actually a pretty good athlete, better athlete than I thought. Spins the ball, has no touch or I would say changeup. But like, you see way more with him than you ever did with Anthony Richardson. Like, Anthony Richardson, objectively, is I would say one of the worst players over the last couple of years. And so when they signed Daniel Jones, my take was like, he's done. And it wasn't even because I'm some big believer in Daniel Jones. I also think you got to factor in the locker room. Like that's where a lot of times this is not 1983 where Joe Gibbs or Bill Walsh or Bill Parcells. These coaches, I saw it with Kyle Shanahan with Trey Lance. It was like the moment I saw like Fred Warner and Debo and Trent Williams not really sing the praises of Trey Lance, I'm like, he's done. He's done. And then the moment Purdy got his chance, before he'd even started the game, Fred Warner's like, I've seen this guy run a scout team for the last 3 months. It's the best thing I've ever seen. It's like, geez, this thing's a wrap if it just goes solid. And I think it's not the NFL's not the NBA, but star players, impact players. Let's use the Colts for example. Like if DeForest Buckner has an opinion, it's being heard by Chris Ballard and the head coach, and that didn't happen back in the 80s and the 90s. Hell, probably even 15, 20 years ago to the rate it does now because of the amount of money you're paying guys and because how important those guys, once you're giving a guy 20, $30 million, if he's your team captain, high level leader, like you want him to have ownership in the thing. And I think that happens way more than it probably even gets reported a lot of times. And because, in fairness to the player, like they don't want that on their hands, right? It's not, I didn't think this guy should be starting or whatever. But don't you agree? Wouldn't we be shocked if it came out like team to team how much impact some of the high level guys have? And like this guy, we need to see this guy a little bit more because the coaches and the players spend so much time together. Like they're
Right.
kind of one,
They
especially.
know.
And
Yeah.
once you become, a Khalil Mack and Aaron Donald, the Honey Badger, whoever, I'm not even talking the quarterbacks. You're viewed much closer to an equal than most of the random guys on the team that get shuffled through, right?
Yeah, you can't bullshit your own players too. Like it doesn't
No.
matter where you were drafted. If the guy stinks and you're trotting him out there as a starter, or he doesn't even have to stink if he's not as good as the other quarterback in the room, like that farce cannot go on and on and on. I mean, Zach Wilson and the Jets kind of played that game for a while too. And by the way, Anthony Richardson, number one on Ryan Poles' board before they traded that pick in 2023. I wanted to ask you this just while we're on the scouting topic too. So when I wrote that part two on polls and got some different perspectives from some of his scouts. There was one scout who said, "Look, he's just traits obsessed." Speaking of Anthony Richardson and wanting, the guys with the good 40s and the broad jumps and the verticals and projecting height, weight, and what somebody could become one day. And another scout said, he never graded off a blank slate. He never was an area scout, grading a prospect for the first time, on the road, living out of Marriott's, the bags of Chick-fil-A all over the
He
car.
was never
And
he was never a road guy.
no, he was a scouting assistant in '09 for Scott Pioli, doing a lot of his stuff, running all over the place. And then immediately as a coordinator and then a director and then becomes a GM. So this scout's point was, look, he never had his ass on the line. Like he never he had the quote unquote answers to the test theoretically. He could see
Yeah.
those other grades come in and just kind of grade somewhere in the middle, and you're never really wrong. And his point is like the guy can't evaluate. He doesn't know what he's looking at because he never had to take that chance. Just generally, do you think there's something to that? Like there's really good GMs around the NFL who weren't area guys. Like I think every path is a little different, and Ryan Poles did have John Dorsey as a mentor, but just in general, what is the value to that? Like, do you think that maybe that can hold a GM back if you never were out there taking a risk on a prospect, looking at somebody for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that. Let's use Veach as an example because Howie was never like a true road guy, though he's
Right.
been into schools. Now, Ryan Poles, when he was before he became a GM, is going into schools. But like you said, if I go into Alabama or Ohio State, well, our road guy and probably our college director have already written up these guys, so we have a base of information. It's not just me going in for the first time. There's probably some validity to that. I after your article came out and obviously it made waves and everyone was talking about it. And this is a big like most of my opinions. Like I'll just reach out to a couple of my guys that I know are just elite at their gig. They don't even have to be GMs. They're sometimes more on the road, so they get a different perspective with some of these guys. And I've never heard bad things about the guy personally, because you know how the NFL works. Some people like scumbag, like people I know that have been around him or even know him, like liked him. I'm talking before he became a GM. But the one thing is like clearly he carries himself. Like the one guy described it to me, almost like an elitist. And
Yeah.
part of it is
That's what I
he
heard too.
played, so I think he's around some of these guys. He views himself as superior, which I think you got to be careful to do. Right when you're a head coach, you're the top of the food chain. But let's use Andy, who's like Ryan Poles became a name under Andy Reid. Andy does not carry himself that way. Even Sean McDermott, who you report on, can be tightly wound, but he is a super high character, down to earth. Would stop his car if someone was like off the road to help. Like he's a very down to earth in terms of dealing like that. And most of the Andy's guys that had the privy to be around, from Nagy to Doug Peterson, are very just easygoing spags, like super high character guys. So I think some of the way that Poles is carrying himself is unlike a lot of the guys that have come up and, for Andy. And listen, you make mistakes, it happens. But the one thing I would say about like the Caleb situation, the easy thing was to draft Caleb Williams because universally everyone was on your side. But that his job is not to make the media happy. His job's to get it right. And the one thing I will reference all the time, I don't know if you might have reported on this, or it obviously became a big story, was that Adam Peters bringing in all the guys to Top Golf.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I would guess, I've never asked him this, but like Jaden Daniels was the top of his list of that next tier of groups, knowing. But you're still like part of your job is like we gotta know this for sure. So let's bring them all together. Let's see how they interact and see what we can glean from this situation. He didn't have to. He could have just been like, I'm going with Jaden, Heisman Trophy. He's my favorite player. But that's not the job. So part of the story with everyone makes a big deal over, well, it's just scorn coaches or maybe a fired scout or whatever. Even if you remove all that stuff, just the process of like Caleb Williams bringing no one else is insane. Like I think you wrote, you don't even need to bring in the six of them, but at least your top two or three guys to bring in, right? That's usually how it works. Like if you have the fourth pick and you're going to take a wide receiver, let's use like Monty Ossenford a year ago where he took Marvin Harrison. I bet if we look back, he brought in Marvin and Rome during the period of time, even if he was leaning Marvin the whole time. That's part of the job. So that to me, where maybe his, uh, again, like if he has like, I would say it would be hard for him to kind of look down on that, like the area scouts and stuff, because he needs those guys. But clearly, his process does not look at it like most of these guys throughout the league. That, like you said, they all have, Howie's background's different than Bean's background's different. Gutekun's that's different. John Schneider's, but
Yeah.
in my experience, I don't know Ryan Poles, never met the guy, but even just like I don't want to say I got to know him, but interacted with John Schneider a little bit since he's come on my podcast, known Spytech for a while, Jason Light. Like these guys are just pretty easygoing guys. And they're very, very serious about the process of it all. And Jason Light, who is as good as anyone in the draft, right? And acquiring players, it's like they take that shit really seriously. Excuse my language. I don't know if we swear on this, but
Oh,
I just clearly with the Bears. I mean, you saw some of the stats coming out on Sunday. I mean, look at the Lions compared to them. Of just, and I've heard Brad Holmes again. Don't know that guy either, but just seems carries himself a little bit different than Ryan. And in this league, I go back to the comment he made when he got hired about how we're going to win the North. Like you were around Andy Reid and said that, like he would never say those words, because he knows how hard, even if it was going to be true and Andy would dominate whatever division he was in, the first day on the job to make that comment, like you've been in the NFL long enough. You were a player that got siphoned out immediately because you weren't good enough. This thing's so hard and so much stuff's out of your control. I mean, the Bengals could have won 11 games. Then Burrow hurts his toe and now might win six. Like, how could you say that? And
well, he's
that to me
Twitter
is
obsessed.
pretty enlightening about that first moment when he gave his first comments and he said that was like, damn.
It's like he's playing for the clip. It's like he knows this is the quote that will be clipped and shared on Twitter. I mean, these are people working with him every day who said he is obsessed with social media and what everybody's saying about him and the team and perception. And yeah, they've got their own TV show and they have their own draft meetings, but then they have another set of quote unquote draft meetings for the cameras to disseminate to the public. It's very strange, very narrative obsessed. I think I think you just nailed it, John. Like it there's probably some truth to what the one scout said about not never really being an area guy, never grading a prospect for the first time with regularity. Probably some truth to the traits obsession, and that's how you draft 34 players, and none of them have even made a Pro Bowl in 3+ years. But central to that is personality. I was shocked to talk to these GMs around the NFL, scouts around the NFL. I thought for sure at least one or two would be like, oh yeah, no Ryan back to his Kansas City days, really good relationship. Even some people I thought assumed that had a relationship with him. I don't really know the guy. And then when one GM, who I can only describe as like one of the friendliest people in pro football that I've ever encountered, said this about Ryan Poles, quote, Ryan Poles, even when he was in Kansas City, just came off as an arrogant asshole. It's an entitlement and an arrogance all coming from a team that hasn't been successful. Even with other GMs that's done it a long time, you don't feel that. So there was always something with him. You always felt this arrogant entitlement to him that you're not used to. You don't have that a lot in this league. It's not normal. And then another GM said this, there's something different about him. I've never been the biggest fan. He acts like he has it all figured out and has all the answers. That to me is central to falling in love with Caleb Williams, seeing Patrick Mahomes. Oh, by the way, in his interviews, he's taking credit for Patrick Mahomes, I was told, and doing everything in your power to get everybody on board. Look, even if it's your guy, like you want
Which
to go
is
sleep at
crazy
night,
because that's a well-established story that it was Brett Veach leading the charge on that thing, right? I
right?
mean, it's like, what are we talking about? Like, that's no one even has ever disputed that, from the head coach to him to everyone that's ever been around that situation who was pumping, Mahomes from the jump.
Right. And I'm not sure exactly what he said, but there is one person who heard that in his interviews was, aligning himself with that decision. I just think it's arrogance and entitlement and ego that's the driving force in the quote unquote rigged process, how 2024 went off the rails, and really how this roster has completely gone off the rails.
Yeah, I mean, this is again my NFL experience inside in a building was in Philly, and this would just not be tolerated. I mean, people heads would be rolling, and I think part of this is, and I talked about this on the podcast. Kevin Warren's a good example of I know a few people that are connected with the Big Ten. I don't think there were a lot of tears shed when he left their situation to go to the Bears. But he immediately goes in the Bears. He feels like it's like the Green Bay Packers and he's in charge, like he's a policy or a Murphy. And this is unlike the Green Bay Packers. They have an ownership, but the ownership is just ripe for the takeover because they got no clue what they're doing. So you got Kevin Warren, who I don't think anyone credible around football would take seriously. And then you got Ryan Poles, who in theory should be the football guy who's doing a terrible job. And then you got Ben Johnson, who, when you look at some of these, like you look at Kevin O'Connell, he's a pretty optimistic, happier. He's a positive guy. I put some of these young offensive guys in different categories. Like, McVay, I think used to be had some roller coaster. Now he's much more of a positive.
Yeah.
Where you get LaFleur and Kyle, I think those guys can lean a little angry or negative. It's just their person. We're all human beings. That's our personality. Ben is much more reminds me of like LaFleur and Kyle, of just like very stern, very serious, not a huge bullshit guy. I just think, and honestly, he might even be more than those guys. Like, it's rare to I even see him smile. Now, granted, who'd be
I
smiling during
know.
these games, but even throughout his career with the Bears, it's like this guy's pretty dialed. How is this all going to work? I mean, you talk to these GMs, they got to be, even not for your story, it's like, no chance. This is, now, it's hard for Ben to gain more juice when his team's losing, but they just gave the guy 5 years, $13 million or whatever. Like, how is this going to continue with the way it's going? I
I
don't
mean,
know. I don't see it's possible.
and I know you've gotten into this with Colin as well. It's so true. Like through the months of talking to all these people, it was described as like an oil and water situation. Like Ben Johnson, serious in the lab, drawing up plays, every answer, every question, door locked, like just figuring it out. Offensive genius. Caleb wants to be creative, improvise, backyard football. Like from a football standpoint, they clash. From a personality standpoint, it's early, but don't I mean from what we see, it doesn't exactly seem like they're meshing that well. He said some very nice things about Tyson Bagent. Probably not a coincidence. I don't know. Like it's the thing is the previous coaching staff, and they'd be the first to admit this, like their big mistake was just completely castrating their playbook for Caleb Williams, giving him whatever he wanted out of the shoot, like OTAs, training camp, changing calls, changing the playbook. And Ben Johnson is not going to do anything close to that. It's his offense. He's going to want to go down with his guy, and it's on Caleb Williams to get on board, or they'll find somebody else who can run this offense. So it was many GMs, many scouts were very interested to see how this union would go down.
One thing I've learned around Pat Hill and Andy, like I'm a believer in traits as well. Like it's kind of my experience, trait guys. But when it specifically comes to quarterbacks, because obviously you just watch Caleb spin it. I mean, he throws a extreme arm talent and arm power, right? And he's a really good athlete. And he's built like Russell Wilson. He's taller, but like built like a tank, right? He's not like watching Kyler, who looks really small, who can get away with it because he's such an elite athlete. Like Caleb's well put together. But if you don't have touch and feel, like listen, Mahomes, they're missing receivers. It's been a struggle offensively for a couple years. But when you watch him, you go, this guy's really got a good feel for the position, and he has great traits. But like even Mahomes just keeping him in that game against the Eagles, like some touch passes and even plays that don't work. Obviously, he missed a deep ball here and there. It's the NFL; it's going to happen, right? But just on an out route on 3rd and 6, if the guy's open, he's going to hit him. And so, like the traits, the Anthony Richardson has no chance. And Caleb, every once in a while he'll do it, but for the most part, the rhythm, the timing, the feel, it just does not exist. It does, and you watch most of these young guys; it can be very hit or miss. The NFL is really hard, but all the good quarterbacks, Josh, one area that Lamar has just morphed from where he started to where he's now is the touch and the feel. He's just so calm. Caleb, there's always this frenetic energy that maybe in years down the road you can at least temper and figure out. But right now it's like it's impossible to call offense because he calls a play. Well, if there are 4 guys running a route, and if the first guy's not open, obviously you're supposed to work to your progressions or whatever. But his natural inclinations to put his head down. And then if he scrambles, well, all those routes, the timing of it are completely now irrelevant and thrown off. And it just becomes a backyard football. And watching the Lions yesterday, Jared Goff can't even physically attempt to play like that, right? So his entire life, going back to Cal with McVay and then with Ben Johnson, now Johnny Morton, if he's going to have success, timing, rhythm, occasionally you might have to scramble within the pocket, and scramble is probably the wrong way to describe it. It's more like move within the pocket, but it's timing, rhythm, and Caleb just plays the opposite of that. And even if he is salvageable down the line, no one ever flips a switch in the middle of a season with like all of a sudden, he can just sit in the pocket and pick you apart. I mean, Kyler Murray is a good example of like his style is kind of his style. Like I watch him play, he looks no different than he did 3 or 4 years ago. He's an all-time freak for a little guy, but like his style is a style. And if you're expecting anything different at this point in time, like don't.
I want to ask you
And
about Patrick Mahomes.
Kyler, in fairness to Kyler, is a much better NFL player than Caleb Williams.
Yes. No, that's a good point. And I liked, I think you were with Colin last night making that point on the quarterbacks who can kind of keep their head up, right? And they're bobbing, they're looking like they're seeing the field.
Mahomes is a great example. Like his head's always up. He's not. He ran a little bit yesterday, but he's not looking to do that. Josh Lamar have become really good at the head up when they're moving, and even Lamar. And maybe this statistically you could argue against what I'm about to say, but feels like running, if it's a pass play, is his last resort. Like he wants to throw the ball, so he will scramble outside the pocket. He'll run last minute. He wants to pass, and it's because he's looking down the field. Russell did that when he was in the prime of his career forever. He would keep his head up, scramble around. I think part of for him, he couldn't see.
Yeah. Yeah. As we try to separate, fact from fiction, I imagine there'll be a lot of discourse around Patrick Mahomes this week. And you look at that stat line, 16 to 29, a buck 87, 72.1 rating, had that bad overthrow that you referenced to Tyquan Thornton. I don't know. I went back and rewatched that game. I had the same takeaway that you just referenced, John. Like I thought he had a hell of a game. I thought he made he threw the team on his back. So like even when things, and I imagine we'll get into specific plays, but like even when everything kind of fell apart after halftime, like the first drive that went on downs, it's 4th and 1. I don't know why you're not putting it in 15's hands. They just kind of had a blah run to the right side, and then the next drive they punt. 3rd and 6 bomb to Thornton. Insane throw on a rope. He can't catch it. And then the next drive is that 14 plays, 74-yard driver. He puts it right on Travis Kelce and that angle route picked off. And that's obviously the play of the game. But all the plays he made before everything fell apart was vintage Mahomes. I'm not worried at all about the Chiefs. 0-2, getting these receivers back down the road. I don't know. Am I crazy? Like, should people be worried about where this quarterback and this offense are right now? I feel like there were enough plays jammed into this game against the defending champs. It just reminded me of Mahomes
Totally.
against the Bills in the playoffs, waddling and shimmying about wherever he wants.
Well, when you've been winning at their rate, you're going to draft to the end of the round. So they've used 2 picks. Like it's like, well, what's up with their passing game? Well, Xavier Worthy lasted 3 plays in the first game, and even Travis Kelce was like, "That's on me. I'm a 13-year veteran. I can't run into him." Hurt his shoulder, and we haven't seen him play really more than the 3 snaps. He's been gone, and he's just standing on the sideline in sweats. And during the YouTube broadcast, they're like, Andy Reid told us they were going to use him in a ton of plays. Well, obviously, they used a first-round pick on him, and he runs like a 4.240. That's Andy loves those guys. And then Rashee Rice, who looked like an excellent player, not only got hurt last year, but then the Lamborghini incident was a moron, got suspended, so he's gone. So they've used a pick 55 and pick 31 on 2 guys that are not playing. And like this guy's had an incredible career, and I thought he was trying to muster it up yesterday because he made a couple big plays, the stiff arm on DeJean. But Travis is old, and Travis, for the most part, doesn't even look like yesterday. I think that game meant a lot to him. Obviously, the juices were flowing. They're playing the Eagles. But he doesn't really look like that even most games anymore these last couple of years. So they got an aging, legendary offensive weapon in Travis, and they're missing their 2 best wide receivers. Now, Xavier Worthy is the best. He was pretty productive last year. I think he had like 59 catches and 6 touchdowns. So you would imagine by year 2, if I told you, hey, year 2 with Mahomes, what's that looking like? I'd have been like 80-8 or something, like in some explosive plays. So it's just hard. I'm with you. I think Mahomes, Hurts is a fascinating guy because his team's going to win a ton, and they are loaded. And the tush push, even if they're not cheating on it, is unstoppable. but no one would argue that he's like Patrick Mahomes level as a passer. I mean, it's like they can't. You see that viral clip of Chris Jones, like, bro, you didn't even throw for 100 yards, and he's like, we won the game, which is true. Like the whole point is to win the game, but he has not sliced these first couple games. Like I've lived there. People got to be asking like, what's up with this new OC? Like, what's going on here, guys? Like, what's up? We're paying these two wide receivers a lot of money. We got a tight end. Saquon can run some wheel. Like, how are we not throwing for 180 yards? Like, what's happening here? That's keep an eye on that one. Winning
Yeah.
at least quiets it a little bit, but I'm with you. I thought, I mean, knowing these guys, like what Mahomes stands for off the field in terms of his work ethic, how much he cares, and I would say the same thing for Travis. Mahomes still just has the ability. It just, Travis, like a lot of guys, as they get older, they're just not quite the same. So it's like Travis being, instead of being a 10 out of 10 in his peak, is probably on most weeks closer to like a 5 or 6, and then you're just missing wide receivers because that left tackle they got at the end of the first round looks like he's got a chance to be pretty good. They got a good center and a guard. The running backs, if their passing game was good, would be more than serviceable. Those guys run hard. They just the run game's a huge part of their repertoire because their passing game doesn't really threaten you. I mean, Thornton. I mean, he right now he's their number one kind of push the ball down the field option. I mean, because Hollywood Brown, I think early in his career was known as a speed guy. He feels more like a possession, like running, quick outs, curls across the middle, just like getting them, 3rd and 7, getting a first down more
Yeah.
than what he was known for coming out of Oklahoma and early in his career.
I mean, I guess Travis Kelsey, all-time great, Hall of Famer. Shouldn't they have just like cut ties, figure out a way to send him on his merry way after last season?
I think it's hard.
He
I think
cost
it's
them the
hard
game.
when you've won as much as they. If they hadn't won at the clip in which they won, he got a little bit of an NBA treatment. I would say is like all the Super Bowls, the connection with the quarterback, how much Veach and Andy like him. I would say most guys would not. I would say his situation's probably even an outlier, even for Coach Reed, who Coach can balance it pretty well of being beloved by everyone. He's let a lot of guys go, But this
Yeah.
is this is probably, and I think Travis knows it. Like I would expect him to like I don't envision Travis playing on another team. Do you? So and listen, it was the law of averages. If you go to 5 Super Bowls in 6 years and then your down season is like 10-7 with some injuries, at one point in time yesterday when they were driving and right before Travis had it tipped off, I was like, this is an all time like championship medal just win. Like how are they should not be able to beat the Eagles and Patrick and Coach Reed and Spags and that defense. It's like this is just we're just gonna find a way. It's ugly. They won 15-2 last year and most of their wins were ugly. Like they're really more of a gritty, ugly team than this sexy team that I think we first fell. I don't know if everyone fell in love with them, but they were, if you like football, they were enjoyable to watch in like 2019, 2020, 2021. The version of this team is much different these last couple years.
It is crazy too. I mean, Patrick Mahomes tears Rashee Rice's ACL last year, and
Yeah.
then Travis Kelsey gets Xavier Worthy hurt this year. Yeah, but we're gonna have to see them fully formed when those guys get back. But I can see a world in which the Chiefs are, like you said, 10-7, maybe 11-6, and feeling better about the state of things offensively come January than the
I'll
last two
say this
years.
though, and you know the Bills well. Obviously, the Ravens have been like for those two guys who I think, I mean, in my life watching football starting in like the early mid '90s are two as talented of guys as I've ever seen. I mean, they are freak shows and they're fun to watch, good guys, like everything you'd want in just your star players in the league. Like, if not now, then when? For both those guys. I mean, they got really good teams. In theory, the Ravens should be better than the Bills, but somehow the Bills beat them 2 times in a row, right? And you got these guys in the peak of their power. This is your opportunity for both those teams. Like, can you get the 1 seed? Can you get the home games? We saw the Ravens a couple years ago, but now it's like Lamar got shedded a little bit last year. I know they lost, but he played much better in the second half. So it wasn't like he was just a crappy playoff player the whole game. Josh has played well in the playoffs. It's like one of those teams should represent the AFC eventually. Like Peyton Manning got to the point, like, are you just going to beat Tom? It's like, yeah, he did, right? And it's like, oh, one of these guys, are the Chiefs just going to stand in your way? Like you can't all of a sudden it's like, oh, the Chargers or the Broncos. Like it's got to be one of those two guys in the AFC this year. It has to be because if they can't do it now, it's like, geez, how are they going to go through another off season? When was the last time I think I looked? The Chiefs haven't been 0-2 since 2014.
Oh yeah, not never in Patrick Mahomes' career. His first time. Is there a quarterback though? Like which quarterback other than Lamar, other than Josh Allen? We can't say Burrow right now. He's out for 3 months with the toe. Which quarterback out there in the AFC has the best chance at sneaking up on everybody, getting to the AFC Championship game, beating, slaying Mahomes and the Chiefs?
Well, we're doing this before Monday night, but the way Herbert looked last week was like, whoa. I mean,
Right?
that was like, hey, Josh Lamar, I'm right here as well. That was, and let's face it, he's got a coach who has just been winning for like 20 years. They have a toughness with their team. They just kind of got reliable players like Keenan Allen and Lad McConkey translate to tough Denver games, right? That's got like those guys feel like Patriots in 2014, you know? And they draft a running back who's probably not the sexy. This isn't Saquon Barkley or Adrian Peterson, but he's just going to be a solid physical back. They're going to have a good defense because that Jesse Minter, their defensive coordinator, is a stud. With Mack and Derwin James, they got a physical presence. They're well coached, and Harbaugh's style just translates when the weather turns. And
Yeah.
when we talk about Buffalo, when we talk about Baltimore, when we talk about Kansas City, it's freezing cold and stuff. That's why Miami the last couple of years never have a shot in the playoffs, right? But you look at those teams, like it's been the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Bills. Like it gets ugly, it gets cold, and it's like this thing becomes a war. And I do think that their head coach is wired for those wars. And I listen, he had a bad game. Peyton Manning had some terrible games in the playoffs. You're going to define his career off one bad game. It's like, guys, like come on, guys. And I'd say the same thing for Lamar. Now, you get to a point, I always said this about Dak, like, why couldn't Dak get hot? And then he had like 3 straight years where it's like, that was a terrible stretch. And he might never have a good enough team to get back. So it's like, yeah, I mean, sometimes you just look back, it's like, never got it done. But I do think that Herbert, when you factor in kind of the Baltimore, I would say, ethos with Ortiz coming with Jim. Jim and John are essentially the same type guys. Jim's a quarterback, but he's really wired more like a defensive tackle or an offensive guard, from a toughness standpoint. So they're a team. I think a lot of these I mean, the one thing about the AFC, like they got tough guys, like Pete Carroll, like the Raiders, they're going to be tough as the next couple of years. It's just a tough guy conference. It's why like I didn't take the Bengals seriously even before he got injured because like that style doesn't work. You know, the way Tomlin's team, like, how is this defense this bad? Where's the toughness with this franchise? And if that's gone, they got no shot. So Denver's defense isn't quite as good as last year, at least through 2 games, but clearly they got some dudes that every team would want. So I'm not writing them off by any means. All the teams that are physical. The Bills don't have the personnel of some of these other teams, but they have like this no quit mentality. And I think it's because they've been in all these big games over the years.
Yeah.
There's a tough. I mean, their head coach is a tough guy, right? He's kind of a former wrestler, just chip on his shoulder, defensive guy. So and obviously Josh plays tough the way he runs. So I think the AFC is just obviously it's just deeper at the top than the NFC. That looks like, I mean, this Eagles team kind of looks a little weird. The Packers look fantastic, long way to go, but through 2 games, they're the best team in the NFC. The Rams, like Stafford's back, gonna hold up for 4 more months. And then there's just a lot of like Niners and just other teams. The Lions, I wouldn't just write off yet. It's a little more wide open, where it's clear like 4 or 5 teams in the AFC. It's like, and really, it's what feels like Josh and Lamar at the top right now. Like one of those guys should win the AFC, but football, 1 game. This isn't a 7 game series.
I love that point too. I mean, the ethos of a team. You got to have some toughness. I think 4 or 5 years ago, if we were having that conversation, we'd be laughed at by the analytic powers that be. Who cares about running the ball, playing defense, being tough? Like you need that element. I mean, the Bills, they've been evolving to toggle between play styles to where, yeah, they can spread you out and throw it all over if they need to. But I think that game against Cincinnati in the playoffs, they got pushed around in the snow. That was a wake up call to Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott. We have to value the line, get a running back, get better in some spots on defense. Now, they still haven't really done it in January. They haven't gotten over that hump, but I think they're more confident they can
Cook
play
has
that
changed them
style.
for sure. A number 4 feels
Yeah.
like a game changer for them the last couple of years. Like their team, he's taken them to another level. I feel like when you're just the heartbeat of the team and the way they play, and there's sometimes your toughness can come on offense as well, right?
Oh
When Jim
yeah.
Harbaugh, when everyone's like, take Malik Neighbors, he's like, I'm taking an O lineman.
He
They're the
called him a
tip of the
weapon.
spear. Yeah.
But that's what brings us back to the Chargers. They have the stud quarterback who can do everything, make every throw, but they're going to have that ethos. They're going to have that toughness. And I'm with you. One playoff game shouldn't just completely cloud the reality of what they got cooking over there. John, this was awesome. Thanks so much for hanging out. You got places to be, things to do, podcasts to record.
When's
Three
your
and
next
out.
70,000 word essay coming out?
I don't know, man. You know what? I wrote down on a sheet of paper here. I wanted to talk Mahomes, Drake May, had all these other topics, but inevitably that magnetic pole of Ryan Poles and Caleb Williams. We ended up talking Bears. But yeah, we'll move on to something else. I promise everybody out there, we'll start chipping away at a different series. And hey, you're fantastic, John. Everybody out there, do yourself a favor. Download Three and Out wherever you listen, Apple, YouTube. I mean, you guys are everywhere. You're going to learn something every single episode. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, Tyler.